of the trees regarding our gender identity and sexuality. When there's no place like home, empty air, an empty establishment. Friends with Dorothy, fighting for your civil rights, out on the cruel streets tonight.
Today we welcome back a long-standing friend of the program and a former manager of Phoenix FM, our sister station out there in Blanchardstown. So welcome back, Derek Byrne.
Thank you, Mick. It's lovely, as always, to have a good chin wag with yourself.
The last time we spoke, you were a candidate for Unshannon. Now, sadly, that didn't materialise. I'm guessing you got over it because now you've got a new position and new challenges.
Yeah, well, the thing about my race to Shannon in 2020 was that it was very much a taster run, if you like, to see what was involved. I mean, it normally takes around three or four attempts to get into the Shannon, so you've got to kind of dip your toe in the water and find out what's involved. But I didn't run in the by-election where my very good friend Tom Clonan was elected. But let's just say the race isn't over yet. Watch this space.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that because about a week ago I was covering an event. And one of the people there was a senator, and I made the innocent suggestion to him: "What panel were you elected in?" And he, without blushing, said, "I was a Taoiseach's nominee."
Well, no such luck for me, I'm afraid. I will have to earn my place. And be voted in by hopefully the graduates of Trinity College. But you're right, I do have a wonderful new job. A great, exciting opportunity has come my way, working with Men's Aid as the country's first ever LGBT education officer working on intimate partner violence within the LGBT community.
Yeah, let's talk about, first of all, Derek, Men's Aid. We were all familiar because it gets a lot of coverage in the media of Women's Aid. But Men's Aid, I'll be honest, I wasn't familiar with. What's its history and what's its, if you like, its mission in life?
Yeah, well, it was formerly known as Amen. And then briefly as Any Man. And for the last 2 years, under the guidance of our new CEO, Katrina Bentley, has been known as Men's Aid. And there's been a lot of change with the organisation since then. Fundamentally, we support men who are victims of domestic violence. And that is our remit. We see domestic violence as a human rights issue. And we are very much focused on the victim. It is a bit of an uphill struggle. I think it's very hard for people in the general population to understand that a man can be a victim of domestic violence too. 92% of the calls to our helpline come from men who are victims of domestic violence from female victimization. And we've seen I've just seen the figures actually this morning so far, we've witnessed a 30% increase in engagement to the service in the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year. And what that means is that we're on track to engage with between 10 and 12,000 men this year alone, and that's enormous.
It is. It's a bit of a taboo subject, am I right in thinking, Derek? Because I suspect most men who are victims of domestic violence are a bit reluctant to even talk about it, no talk about report it.
That's very true, because of course there's the stigma and shame around the issue. I mean, the stigma and shame is there for women as well, even though, as you say, the general public would be more familiar with Women's Aid. The people who report domestic violence or look for support in relation to domestic violence are really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's really going on. What we aim to do at Men's Aid is to make it easier for men to come forward by underlying our mission that domestic violence is a human rights issue, and there's nothing wrong with looking for support. There should be no shame, and we've got to work through that stigma. This, and the latest strategy, which was launched by Minister Helen McEntee the week before last, I think it's was it last week? Anyway, the third domestic violence strategy speaks about the victim. It doesn't necessarily make the difference between male and female, or indeed member of the LGBT community. And that's the narrative we've got to promote. We've got to understand that this is a human issue, not necessarily a gender issue.
So, when you talk about reporting it, are we talking about reporting it to, say, social services or an organisation like yourself, or even in extreme cases to the Gardaí?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about reporting. I mean, it could simply even be to a friend, speaking to a friend, but reporting to organisations like our own, of course, calling our helpline. But reporting to the Gardaí, to social services, wherever a person feels that they can report safely. And, since I've joined the organisation back in April of this year, one of the things I've learned is that anybody you speak to, any of the services working in this field, are incredibly compassionate organizations. You're always going to meet somebody who will listen to you and will believe your story. Things that men find difficult. They find it very, very difficult to buy into the fact that somebody will actually believe them when they say that they have been subjected to domestic violence, because it's so difficult to, I suppose, see that in our heads. We've been so conditioned to believe that it's only domestic violence is only about women being victimized by men. So we need to get over that. We need to challenge that. We need to open people's minds and open men's minds as well. There's nothing wrong with it, and you should go for support if you need it. And the staff at Men's Aid are the most amazing people, and I've set in on some phone calls and some of the visits to our court support worker in terms of my training, my onboarding, and it was just the most incredible experience. They're the most amazing people in the world.
Yep. What in terms of excuse me, Derek, in terms of burden of proof? Clearly, if somebody has visible marks, there's a much greater propensity to be believed. But in situations where, shall we say, a male does not have visible marks, and I'm talking about your conventional relationships here. We'll come to the LGBT ones shortly, Derek. But
yeah.
How does the burden of proof there pan out? Because it's very easy to just say, oh, look, he's making this up or they're making that up, whatever the situation is. So how does the burden of proof then pan out? Or how do you advise people in those circumstances?
Well, we don't give advice, we support. Mm-hmm. In terms of the burden of proof, that's the issue. There should be no burden of proof. If somebody comes forward and says that they've been a victim of domestic violence, they should be believed. You shouldn't need to see any physical marks. In fact, the vast majority of types of domestic violence that we would encounter would be emotional abuse, mm-hmm. Which shows no external marks. And there shouldn't be that need for a burden of proof. That's not how the services operate. Our way of working is simply to take someone on face value and to believe them. That's the crux of it, that they don't need to prove it. The fact that they have approached the service looking for support is proof enough.
Mm-hmm. I think we're all very familiar with how violence pans out when it's physical, but how do you define violence or abuse when it's non-physical, when it's, as you say, psychological?
Well, emotional and psychological, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and coercive control. These are, part of the wide range of abuse that people encounter, and it's important to understand that the physical abuse is not necessarily what we would see most of. I mean, even in male to female situations, you're looking at a whole range of domestic abuse realities and experiences. But I think, one of the issues that I find working from the LGBT perspective is that emotional violence is reported as being the most threatening form of intimate partner violence experienced by people. Yeah.
So, is there a risk, or are men inhibited from reporting abuse in its wider forms on the basis that were they to push this, particularly to into a legal sphere, they may well lose access to their children? Is that a risk for?
Well, you see, that is one of the emotional forms of domestic abuse or coercive control used by women against men. They will use access to children as leverage. And that's quite difficult, and that very often prevents men from coming forward and looking for support.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tell me here, Derek, how much of a role does, say, substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, whether it's illegal drugs or whatever, how much does that that we have evidence that plays in, shall we say, relationship abuse?
Well, certainly, what I need to just underline is that my area of expertise is the LGBT perspective, and incidents of alcohol and drug use and abuse are much higher within that cohort than within mainstream society, and they are major factors when it comes to intimate partner violence. We know, for example, that amongst female to female intimate partner violence, alcohol abuse is a major factor. There's a wonderful professor at Trinity College in Cal who's been doing some great research on this area, and her findings point to what we call bidirectional abuse between women, where both are being violent toward factor. Certainly with men, bisexual men, gay men, men who have sex with men, drug use is a major issue, and we're certainly seeing that coercive control in relation to the chemsex scene is emerging as a very worrying factor. So yeah, they are big factors in this story.
Sure, that's a very interesting point you're making, Derek. But before we go down that path, I just want to ask you about what you're now the LGBT officer for, or a consultant for Men's Aid. What's your defined role, and what do you hope to achieve in that role?
Right. Well, I'm the LGBT plus education officer with Men's Aid, and this is a role that I took on in April of this year. We launched our education program on the 9th of June. It was launched by Minister Roderick O'Gorman, who is funding my role. And fundamentally, during lockdown, there was an increase in calls to our helpline from men who are in relationships with other men. And our CEO, Katrina Bentley, realised that perhaps we should respond to this and explore this avenue. I'm the first in this role, the only person in the country doing this kind of work, which is very exciting. What we intend to achieve through my role is to provide support for members of the LGBT community who are experiencing intimate partner violence. I've been working with a whole range of organisations in the gay community. In fact, tomorrow I'm doing full day's training at Outhouse, working with a number of the organisations, because we want to come together and establish an LGBT domestic violence coalition, so that we can look at the range of expertise that already exists within the community and coordinate that in a more effective way, so that we can help people within our community who are experiencing this kind of violence. It is widespread, and we need to start doing something about it. And we need to look at what services are already there and how we can improve the services. But I think it's also important to look at prevention. How you can help people to identify the red flags of intimate partner violence and what they can do to prevent the situation from escalating further. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm very excited about being part of that and leading out on the coalition, the LGBT Domestic Violence Coalition. I've also been working with a number of people on an international basis. Dr. Rob Stevenson in the United States, for example, he was here in June. I met up with him a couple of times and we're in regular contact. Professor Ben Hine in the UK, who's been writing some excellent papers again on this issue and is a great support to me and the team. We've been welcomed with open arms here in Ireland and internationally. People are delighted to see that this work is being carried out.
So I don't want to get too semantic here, Derek, but how do we define a domestic relationship, particularly in the LGBTQ context? Yeah. Do people have to be resident under the same roof for it to be defined as it? So you can be, say, in a long-standing relationship, and that would be.
You can be in a long-standing relationship. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be living with somebody, and in fact, it could be a past partner as well. I think what we understand by intimate partner violence, in general as well, is that technology has changed the whole playing field. I mean, I could be here talking to you now and getting nasty texts on my phone. That's domestic violence. That you don't even have to be in the same room as someone to be experiencing coercive control or intimate partner violence. And so the definition is widespread. The government, the Department of Justice, released a definition when they released the third strategy, which we're all working from now. But it's clear that it's really, in terms of defining what intimate partner violence is or domestic violence is, it's quite widespread now. There's a wider understanding of what that means. But yes, it doesn't have to be people living under the same roof, and you don't even have to still be in that relationship to be experiencing intimate partner violence.
So, can we go back to the issue where you were referring to, which is the emergence of chemsex? Now, it's been around for a few years, but I spoke to the switchboard about 6 months ago about this, and they were very concerned about not only the emergence of it, but the proliferation, the side effects in terms of sexually transmitted diseases or infections, and clearly the abuse of illegal substances as well. Yeah. What are you finding about that, particularly in terms of how it pans into domestic abuse?
Yeah, well, we our education program will eventually include 4 workshops. We've launched the first 2, which are about, the first one's about identifying the signs and factors of, I should say, IPV, if that's okay, intimate partner violence. And also the second workshop is about taking action. What can you do? What supports are available, and how can you do something about the situation if you find yourself experiencing IPV? The third and fourth workshops that I'm working on chemsex and coercive control, and domestic violence and HIV transmission. And what we're finding is, in fact, I was only reading a paper by Rob Stevenson this morning on increases of IPV during the COVID-19 pandemic. He did some wonderful research in the United States, which showed that there was a significant increase in intimate partner violence during that period, brought on by the added stresses and uncertainties of lockdown, but also that half of the people who reported IPV experienced it for the first time. So I would imagine that what that's telling us is that during lockdown, with the fact that people couldn't mix, you probably had an increase. I mean, we know anecdotally, from the Irish context that the chemsex scene exploded during lockdown because there were no venues open. And what people did have was access to apps like Grindr and all of the other social apps where people meet each other. And so chemsex parties were happening during the COVID period due to the lack of other venues to go and socialize and other social options. And so what we've seen is huge increases in sexual transmitted infections, and also if you look at the figures for HIV infection, they're quite significantly higher this year than they were last year. Now, obviously people were not necessarily tested at the same rate that they were last year, but the increases are far higher than you would expect. So it is very worrying, absolutely. And this is why, we've decided to meet this issue head on at Men's Aid. And I think, we're being quite brave in doing that, and we're being applauded for doing that. It needs to be explored, and we need to look at what's been going on here and what can we do to deal with it.
Yeah. What you're saying, Derek, I think is it's going to be, people are going to be hearing this a lot for the first time. And for those out there who may, shall we say, it has a resonance for, what would be the best approach, particularly if they wanted to contact your organization? How would they do that?
Well, and this is what I realized, Nick, as well, that a lot of what I'm talking about could be a trigger for people listening into this program now. And what do they do? Well, of course, if you need help at all, you phone the Men's Aid helpline, and I can give you that number now if you like.
The number there for that.
Yeah. It's 01. 01554 3811. So that's 01554 3811. And that's that's what people can do right now, or even go to our website mensaid.ie. But also, I know, for example, tonight is Men's Night on Switchboard. I just retweeted their tweet there. So people can give them a call after 5 p.m. this evening when our lines close. So this is what I mean about the LGBT Domestic Violence Coalition. We're going to be working in collaboration with other organizations. So for example, as I've just done there, our lines close at 5 o'clock, but the switchboard lines are open this evening. So working together that way, we're going to help members of our community to get a much more effective service. But I think any of the LGBT services that exist at the moment are more than willing to help and will always point people in the right direction.
Sure. Yeah. You briefly mentioned there that your helpline closes at 5. What's your operating hours?
Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And I was just earlier talking about the I mean, quite a significant increase, 36% increase in engagement to your service for any organisation is enormous and quite a concern, because you can't build your capacity that quickly either. So for us, this is the challenge. How do we build our capacity at Men's Aid to meet the emerging need? And we saw, for example, the Johnny Depp case, highlight this issue, and we saw significant increases to our phone lines during that whole trial period. And it is the thing that we need, that tells us that we need to be talking about this. We need to open the conversation. We need to change the narrative, the stereotypical view of what domestic violence or intimate partner violence can be. And I think the more that men hear about this issue, the more that they talk about it, the more they will, engage with the services that exist, and will open up and look for help and support.
Yeah. So, if other people want to, excuse me, if organisations want to get yourself in there to give them workshops, Derek, what would be the best way for them to do that? Because
email me at it's education@mensaid.ie. Very easy to get in touch with. I'm very happy to come out and deliver our training, and you can get information on the training on the website mensaid.ie. But we've been very successful already. I've got trainings booked up until September. There is a little bit of availability, so if people want to get in fast. But we're very happy to deliver our training, and we can adapt the training to suit whatever service. I've been working with the Guards, for example, and we've been able to adapt a training session specifically for the needs of the Gardaí.
And should we emphasise, Derek, that it doesn't necessarily mean that all cases will end up in the courts, or they will end up in criminal cases, because what we're looking at here is resolving issues rather than making some legal determination.
Well, we're there to support people, and while there are some legal tools, like if people feel that they are not safe, they can get safety orders, borrowing orders, and we can help them in relation to applying for those, because it can be quite a minefield for people to work their way through that when they're in crisis. People are not necessarily thinking logically either. It's the emotions take over. But there are things that people can do if they feel that they're not safe, or that they feel that their immediate situation is in danger. There are things that they can do, and that's the kind of information we can provide on a helpline as well.
Yeah. Derek Byrne, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but we're delighted to have you share this information. Keep us updated on any developments, and we will be really happy to share with our listeners, because clearly what you're offering is a very important service, not only to the LGBTQ plus community, but to the wider.
Absolutely, and Mick, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
But tell me, you went to the Paul gig. How did that go?
It was incredible. I mean, he's amazing. I've known Paul for too many years, but I think his music is incredible. He writes his own material. He's the most amazing performer. Flo McSweeney performed as well, as did others, but he deserves every piece of recognition that he gets, because he's just the most talented and amazing person.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I didn't meet Paul, but we had him as a guest on this program a few weeks ago. He's just a wonderful, not only a wonderful guest, but a wonderful artist, is the way I would put it as well.
His time has come, I think, and what's great about Paul is he shows us that it's never too late.
Well, look, we will, as I say, we will be featuring some of Paul's music very soon. So in the meantime, Derek, you take care, and we will talk again soon.
Yes. So, yes. Brilliant, thank you.
Congratulations on the new appointment, and I'm confident you'll do a fabulous job there.
Couldn't see the haunted forest for the trees, regarding our gender identity and sexuality. When no place like home. Empty air, an empty establishment. Friends with Dorothy, fighting for your civil rights. Out on the crew, streets